As a synth lover and a YouTube creator, it can be very difficult at times to justify making a video that you really want to make, but that others have done before you, and have done well for that matter. In a world with the wisdom of Nick Bat, the proficiency of Loopop, the charm of Bo Beats, and the sheer genius that is Mylar Melodies, what could I possibly say about the Polybrute that could bring something new to the table? Well, what I try to do in this channel is look at synths beyond the spec sheet and try to give you the perspective of someone who has gone past the honeymoon phase. I want to try to tell you what it's been like to actually use this thing, living with it on a day-to-day basis, both for making music and sound design, what I like, what I dislike about it, and whether I think that its price tag is worth the asking price. If you already subscribed, Bill, welcome back. If this is your first time here, hi, welcome to the midlifesynthesist. Let's get started. So tell me if this sounds familiar at all. A big synth brand name that you love announces its next big synth, the flagship, the one you've been waiting for. Suddenly, YouTube just fills up with reviews and demos of this thing. So you start calculating just exactly what it's going to take to be able to afford this thing. And that might mean working a few extra shifts, or selling a few synths, or your car, or your kids. But you finally get the cash, and you put the order in. Now it's just a matter of time. Finally, the day comes, it arrives, you get it, and it's not what you expected. It might be the sound or the interface, but in the end, it's not the be-all, end-all synth that you thought it would be. And you're just left with some huge disappointment and a very big hole in your bank account. Now, I've had this happen to me a multiple number of times with many synths over the years. So when I took the plunge on the Polybrute, it wasn't without a shade of doubt of whether this thing would end up in heartache or not. So first off, the sound. I suppose it goes without saying that whether a synth speaks to you or not will be largely determined by whether you like the sound that it makes. Now, I've stated before, I don't think that there's much value in debating whether I think a synth sounds good if you don't like how it sounds, because in the end, it's a matter of personal choice. That being said, if I had to describe the Polybrute as a flavor, well, this thing is basically a chocolate whiskey donut wrapped in bacon. And yeah, I know, my donut might not sound very appealing, but what I'm getting at is that the Polybrute has a way of mixing all these flavors into something new and creative. And that's because this thing can be sweet and dreamy, and also can be nasty and harsh. And it can mix both of those worlds with the morphing feature, which is something particular to this synth in the analog world. The Polybrute, at its core, seems to be obsessed with mangling and mixing up things that were never meant to be mixed. Much like the Octatrack, where you find happy accidents in between the scenes by crossfading between different states of parameters and mixing these two, in the Polybrute, they seem to have taken this concept and applied it to basically every level in the sound design, which is insane in an analog synth. The Polybrute just takes sound and sound design to a whole other level. With the musicality and grace that is always present, this thing is one huge sweet spot. The interface. Now, I've said it before, your synth can sound amazing, but if you can't control it, or if it's a pain to program, well, at least in my opinion, it's not a great synth. Especially in the case of the Polybrute, where you have something this complex and this feature-packed. It would have been an easy mistake to make an interface that was just a pain to use. Before this, I always referred to the Novation Peak as one of the best laid out synths that I've ever seen. But now, that title goes to the Polybrute. The sheer amount of hands-on control on this thing is just insane, and it's all done in a very intuitive and fun way, which is very easy and pleasant to learn. Now, as a side note, and hats off to Arturia, the Polybrute comes with a printed manual, which is just a joy to read, and the first few pages actually have you making your first patch, which is very fun to do. The front panel is just chock full of knobs and buttons and faders, which is wonderful because this makes it pretty much a knob per function synth. And that's really practical because just in a few sessions, you're going to develop muscle memory and you're going to remember where all things are. The secondary functions are very easily accessible thanks to a clever implementation of the submenus. Just hold down the button and the menu pops up with the hidden features. As for the submenus for the knobs, just hold down the settings button and twist the knob and that's it. No need for weird button combos you'll never remember. As far as sound shaping goes, the Polybrute gives you amazing flexibility, giving you the typical filter and amplifier envelope as well as a mod envelope and 3 LFOs. And these of course are freely assignable in the mod matrix. Now you also get a 4th LFO or envelope, which is this motion envelope recorder. And this is a knob which you basically pick a parameter and you record a motion on it. And you can single cycle or loop it, which is loads of fun. The LFOs themselves are among the most interesting LFOs I've come across besides the Octatrack. They are all each slightly different and unique in their own way, something that is very much a theme in the Polybrute. As for the Matrix itself, well, I think it could actually be sold as its own separate device. Nick Bad in his review said that he wished they could make it into a Eurorack module and sold it separately, and I can only echo his statement. It's really one of the most enjoyable ways of making a patch that I've ever experienced, and it really takes creativity and sonic possibilities to a new level by making it accessible and providing quick visual feedback. Basically, anything you see on the panel is a mod destination and can be a mod source. Also, you can modulate modulators, and it's all done with a few button presses without the need of menu diving. Just connect the dots and you're golden. Of course, you can always go deeper into submenus, but it's rarely necessary in practice to get really unexpected and great results. I would actually recommend anyone starting off with the Polybrute to go into the presets and go into the mod matrix to see how everything's routed. It's basically a whole library and encyclopedia on sound design. As for the sequencer, you would expect the creators of the KeyStep and BeatStep Pro to know what they're doing. Well, not only is it usable, it's one of my favorite sequencers this side of the deluge. Its many rows of backlit buttons not only give great visual feedback, but they also make for an extremely tactile experience, which I love. Also, you get a few lanes of automation as well, which make it more than a one-trick pony. Actually, one of my favorite things to do on the Polybrute is to set up a sequence and start jamming along on the keyboard, or start experimenting with sound design while the sequence is playing. And that has been a really great way to learn this thing, and it's made me reach a level of connection with the synth that I've only previously experienced with my Sub 37. As for performance controls, on most synths you mostly get the mod wheel, the pitch wheel, and if you're lucky, some aftertouch. On the Polybrute, they decided it wasn't enough that this thing was a sound design monster, they also wanted to go for Performance Synth of the Year award as well. For all the live performers out there, you get aftertouch, split and layered keyboard, a huge master filter cutoff knob, the Morphe, and the touch capacitive ribbon. What more could you ask for? Okay, so up to now this video has just been me gushing all over the Polybrute. So let's talk about some things that I'm not a fan of, but to be honest, I'm really splitting hairs here. One of the things that could have been better in my opinion are the knobs. Now, they're not bad by any means. I actually think that they're the same ones that are on the MiniFreak, but they do feel a bit plasticky for a $2,700 synth, especially when I compare them to one of my Moogs, like for example Matriarch, or even my Innovation Peak. Something else that would have been great on the Polybrute would be more ins and outs for the audio. First of all, the effects on this thing are just next level, and I really wish there was some way to process external audio through the effects of the Polybrute. And another thing that would have been really cool on the Polybrute is having another couple of external audio outputs, because the Polybrute can do up to 2 patches layered on top of each other. And other synths that do the same thing, like the Prophet Rev 2, give you the option of tracking both of those patches independently through 4 audio outputs. Would it have been nice to have those things on the Polybrute? Sure, but this thing is already pretty expensive, so adding those things would have hiked up the price a lot probably. So I'm pretty happy with this as is. Finally, let's talk about the elephant in the room. The price. This thing costs $2,700, and that is a lot of cash. Now, it's important to note that having this synth will not make your music any better on its own, Buying better synths is never the answer to making better music. Learning and educating yourself, practicing, that's the way to go. So what you have to ask yourself is, do you really need this synth? And for most people, the answer is no. But you don't buy this synth because you need it. You buy it because you just can't live without it. This thing has just taken over my studio. It's inspiring and welcoming to play, and even though it has a powerful presence, it tends to sit extremely well in a mix among all my other instruments without being overly intrusive or overpowering, adding just enough to make it indispensable to me at this point. As for actually making patches and doing sound design on this thing, well, I think Ben Jordan said it best in his review. When you start playing around with it, suddenly the hours just fly by, and before you know it, the sun's coming up outside your window. So those are my thoughts about the Arturia Polybrute, but how about you? What do you think about this synth? Is it worth the hype? Is it worth the price? Tell me what you think about it in the comments below, and we'll keep the conversation going. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, commenting, or maybe even subscribing, because it really helps the channel grow, and I really like being here. I hope you found this video useful, or at least entertaining. Have a great week. I'll see you in the next one.